You've felt it. You send a voice memo or you watch a video you're in, and the second your own voice comes through the speaker, something in you recoils. That's not you, some part of your brain insists, but it is you. So why does the most familiar sound in your entire life feel like it belongs to a stranger the moment it gets recorded and played back? In 1966, two psychologists named Philip Holzman and Clyde Rousey decided to actually study this instead of just accepting it as a weird quirk. They played people recordings of their own voices and watched what happened. What they documented wasn't just mild surprise. People visibly recoiled. Some hesitated before speaking again. Some flatly denied that the voice they were hearing was theirs at all, even when they knew, logically, that it had to be. Holtzman and Rousey gave this reaction a name: voice confrontation. And what they found wasn't just that people didn't like a slightly different sound. It was that the reaction looked closer to a small identity crisis than a simple audio complaint. So today, we're digging into why hearing your own recorded voice feels so wrong, what's actually happening biologically when that recording plays, and why your brain seems to treat it almost like meeting an imposter wearing your name. Let's start with a physical explanation, because there is a very real, very mechanical reason your recorded voice sounds different, and it has nothing to do with bad microphones or bad luck. Right now, as you're hearing this, if it were your own voice speaking, you'd be receiving sound through two separate pathways at once. The first is air conduction, the completely normal way sound travels, through the air, into your ear canal, and to your eardrum. The second is bone conduction, and this is the part almost nobody thinks about. When you speak, your vocal cords vibrate, and those vibrations don't just travel outward into the air, they travel inward, straight through the bones of your skull and jaw, directly to your inner ear. Your skull conducts low frequencies far better than air does, so when you talk, your brain is getting a blended signal, air-conducted sound plus a bass boost from bone conduction, and that combination makes your voice sound deeper, richer, and fuller to you than it actually is to literally everyone else in the room. Now here's the part that matters. When you record your voice, a microphone can only capture air-conducted sound. It has no skull to vibrate through, so the recording plays back missing that entire bone-conducted bass layer your brain has relied on your entire life. The result is a voice that sounds thinner and higher-pitched than the one living in your head, and your brain immediately flags it as wrong because it doesn't match the internal model you've been building since you first learned to talk. This is why hearing your own recorded voice feels off. You're not imagining a difference. There really is one, and it's been there your whole life without you ever noticing because you've never once heard your own voice the way everyone else hears it until a recording forces the issue. But here's where it gets more interesting, because Holtzman and Rousey's research showed that the acoustic mismatch alone doesn't fully explain the intensity of the reaction. If it were purely about pitch, you'd expect people to shrug and say, that's a bit higher than I thought. Instead, people showed genuine emotional disturbance. In their follow-up study in 1967, only about 38% of participants could even correctly identify a recording of their own voice within 5 seconds of hearing it. Some people, when confronted with a recording that was unmistakably their own, still resisted claiming it. That's not a technical glitch in perception. That's a mismatch between the self you carry around in your head and the self that shows up when the tape rolls. So we're back to the real question here. Why does hearing your own recorded voice feel so wrong if it's not just about pitch and tone? Holtzman and Rousey's answer was that recordings revealed what they called extra-linguistic cues, things like hesitation, nervousness, sadness, or irritation buried inside how you actually sound that you were never consciously aware you were expressing. When you speak in the moment, you're focused on the content of what you're saying, not the emotional undertone leaking through your voice. But a recording strips away that forward momentum. You're now a listener instead of a speaker, and listeners evaluate. Suddenly, you're hearing hesitations you didn't notice yourself making, a nervous edge you didn't know was there, or a tone that sounds more tired or flat than you intended. Your recorded voice isn't just an audio file, it's evidence, and it's testifying about a version of you that slipped past your own filter. That idea connects to something deeper about identity. Your voice, more than almost any other trait, feels inseparable from who you are. You didn't choose it, and you can't easily change it. And unlike your face, you've spent your entire life hearing a private, distorted version of it that nobody else has ever heard. Every other person in your life knows the air-conducted version of your voice. You are the only person on earth who has never actually heard that version until a recording forces you to hear it. In a strange way, everyone else has always known what you actually sound like, and you're the one who's been out of the loop. That's part of why the confrontation cuts so deep. It's not just an unfamiliar sound. It's the sudden realization that the private internal picture you've built of yourself has a gap in it that only other people could see.
Let's circle back again to the core question, because this is where the psychology gets genuinely strange. Why does your recorded voice feel wrong, even once you understand the acoustics behind it? Understanding bone conduction doesn't make the discomfort disappear, and that's a clue that this isn't purely a hearing problem, it's a self-image problem. Neuroscience research on self-voice perception has found that when people hear themselves speaking in real time, with bone conduction intact, brain activation patterns look different than when they hear a played-back recording. Your brain isn't just processing a sound wave differently, it's treating these two auditory experiences as meaningfully different categories of information, almost like it files voice while speaking and voice on playback into two separate boxes that don't fully talk to each other. There's also a more recent twist to this story that complicates the simple embarrassment explanation. A 2013 study found that when people were played recordings of their own voice without being told it was theirs, they actually rated it more favorably than when they knew it belonged to them. In other words, part of the discomfort isn't really about how the voice sounds at all. It's specifically about the fact that you know it's you. Take away that self-recognition, and the same sound wave becomes just another voice, judged neutrally instead of critically. That finding suggests the cringe isn't primarily sensory, it's evaluative. Your brain isn't reacting to sound quality so much as reacting to being confronted with yourself under conditions you didn't control or rehearse for. Think about how similar this is to seeing an unposed, candid photo of yourself instead of one you picked out and approved. You know logically it's you, but there's a split second of, wait, is that really what I look like? Is that really what I sound like? And that split second is your internal self-image colliding with an external, unfiltered version of the same person. Your voice, like your face in a candid photo, is being observed rather than curated, and that loss of control over your own presentation seems to be a huge part of what makes voice confrontation sting. There's another layer to this worth pulling apart, because the intensity of voice confrontation isn't the same for everyone, and that difference tells us something important. Researchers who study self-voice perception have pointed out that this reaction can be especially intense for people who already have a complicated relationship with how they're perceived, including people navigating gender identity questions or body image concerns. If your voice already feels like it doesn't match who you feel like you are, hearing a stripped-down, unfiltered recording of it can amplify that mismatch instead of just mildly surprising you. This lines up with everything we've already covered, because if voice confrontation is fundamentally about a collision between your internal self-image and an uncontrolled, unfiltered version of yourself, then anyone already wrestling with self-image in other areas is going to feel that collision more sharply. It also explains why some professionals in voice-heavy careers report a much smoother adjustment than average. Neuroscientists studying voice perception have noted that the brain automatically evaluates a disembodied voice, meaning a voice heard without the person physically present, the same way it evaluates a stranger's voice, judging tone, confidence, and likability almost instantly and involuntarily. For someone who records their voice constantly, whether that's a podcaster, a radio host, or someone who reviews their own presentations, that automatic evaluation process gets repeated so often that the brain simply runs out of novelty to react to. The unfamiliar becomes familiar through sheer repetition, and the emotional spike that used to accompany playback gradually flattens out. This also explains a smaller related phenomenon a lot of people notice, the specific dread of listening to your own voicemail greeting. It's often described as one of the most cringe-inducing versions of hearing your recorded voice, and based on everything we've covered, that actually makes sense. A voicemail greeting is usually recorded in a single, awkward, unscripted take, with no editing, no retakes, and no control over tone. It's about as unfiltered and uncurated as a recording of your voice can get, which means it delivers the exact conditions that make voice confrontation strongest. Zero control, zero rehearsal, and full exposure to whatever extra-linguistic cues slipped out in that one unguarded moment. Compare that to hearing your voice in a polished video you scripted and re-recorded 15 times, where you've had the chance to smooth over the version that gets released. The discomfort scales almost perfectly with how much control you had over what got captured, which reinforces that this was never really about sound quality in the first place. It's about exposure without a filter. Now here's some genuinely good news buried in all of this. This reaction is not permanent, and it's not universal proof that something's wrong with your voice. Voice coaches, podcasters, radio hosts, and public speakers consistently report that the discomfort fades with repeated exposure. Every time you hear your recorded voice again, your brain updates its internal model just slightly, gradually accepting the air-conducted version as a legitimate representation of you instead of an alien intrusion. This is basic neural plasticity at work. The version of you that flinches the first time you hear a recording is not doomed to flinch forever. With enough repeated exposure, your brain quietly redraws texture, and the stranger in the recording slowly becomes just you, heard from a different angle. So let's bring this all the way back to where we started. Why does hearing your own recorded voice feel so wrong? Part of it is simple biology, the missing bone-conducted base that's been secretly propping up your self-image since childhood. But the deeper part is psychological, a confrontation between the private, curated self you carry in your head and the raw, unfiltered self that recordings expose without asking permission first. It's not really about the pitch of your voice. It's about being handed unfiltered evidence of yourself and having no say in the edit. And maybe that's worth sitting with the next time you cringe at a recording of your own voice. You're not hearing something broken. You're hearing the one part of yourself that everyone else has always known, and you're just now catching up to them.